must learn.
Man!
Okay. Well, thanks so much for coming here, Antonio. It's a pleasure to have you from Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia.
That is correct, Ulaanbaatar.
That is so amazing.
I don't like to brag. I don't like to brag, but Ulaanbaatar is the best province of Mongolia.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to offend anybody, though.
You talked about so much awesome stuff with Todd's podcast that I really would just like to recommend that. I'll put the link to that. But I really want to know more about kind of what you do in Mongolia and how that relates to all the various styles of wrestling.
Sure. Well, my work, I'm an economist. I'm actually a China economist. So I've been working on the trade war actually since Donald Trump was in his campaign. And that's my main work. And then I teach economics at the university. And then my martial arts odyssey started 20 years ago, 2001, right after 9/11. I started martial arts odyssey, and I just left New York, quit my job on Wall Street, went around the world doing different martial arts and documenting them and studying them. And I'd actually never wrestled. And I did all this documentation on different kinds of styles, published a lot of books and things. And around 2011, I got invited to be a guest judge in the first ever professional MMA tournament in Malaysia. Mm-hmm. And when they offered me that, I said, well, instead of being the judge, can I come and fight? And they allowed me to do that. And that changed my life. And then after that, in that first fight, I wound up wrestling. I didn't know anything. I'd learned to sprawl. I knew how to sprawl. Mm-hmm. And I also knew how to sprawl. I think I just knew how to sprawl.
Man, that's a good start.
It was really funny, man. And I got in this tournament, and I had a reputation as a boxer. And the guy, I guess, was just really afraid. He didn't want to stand up with me and trade hands, so he kept trying to take me down, and I kept sprawling and landing on top of him. Mm-hmm. And I wound up winning the fight. And then suddenly all the newspapers got hold of it, and they're like, oh, not only can he box, he can wrestle too. And I was like, I don't actually know. I just know that one move. But that's it. And that's how my wrestling started from there. And so then from 2011 until now, I've mostly been just doing wrestling, grappling around all different countries in Asia, all different kinds of grappling.
Wow. Isn't that funny how the legend propagates?
Art became life.
Well, nice. But what is the Mongolian style of wrestling, and what could we most compare it to? And how is it kind of unique too?
Okay, so Mongolian wrestling is the art that it's the most similar to is Chinese Shuaijiao wrestling, but I don't know if everybody knows what that is. But the Mongolian wrestling, they call it an open-chested shirt, but basically it's like long sleeves. It's like something you'd wear if you worked behind a grill. They wear long sleeves. There's a rope around the abdomen, and you're allowed to grab this thing anywhere. You're allowed to grab the sleeves. You're allowed to grab it goes behind the neck. You're allowed to grab that. You're allowed to grab the rope. You wear that. You wear briefs, and the briefs are made they're like super strong. Like you can lift two men with the briefs, and so you're allowed to grab the briefs and throw with that. And then they wear these cowboy boots, which are awesome.
Boots.
Yeah, they're amazing. I love the boots are like the best part of Mongolian wrestling. And
wow.
And the wrestling, that's the number two part. The boots are and so basically the rules though is just that you have to throw your opponent on the ground, and what counts as a throw is any parts of his body touches the ground except for the soles of his feet. Then you've won the fight.
Oh, so if you just kind of touch your knee or your elbow, you win?
Yep. Yeah, so you can't do sacrifice throws. You can't do lateral drops and things like that because you can't touch the ground.
Interesting. I guess that makes sense why there's so many successful sumo wrestlers, because that's very similar.
Yeah, so what happened was the Mongolian, so yeah, the sumo connection is really interesting for me, and I have never trained or lived in Japan, and I really want to. What's very funny is I've almost never practiced Japanese martial art, but all my heroes, all my major martial arts heroes, are you still there?
Yep.
Okay. All my major martial arts heroes are Japanese. Jigoro Kano, the judo founder, is a huge hero of mine. Kimura is a huge hero of mine. What's his name? Musashi. I mean, Musashi is just, it's like my spirit animal. So yeah, I would love to go to Japan and train. And there's this a connection between Japan and Mongolia. So what happened was there weren't enough young Japanese going into sumo. And so they began recruiting overseas for the first time, I guess, in the 80s. And that was the domination of the Americans, which were mostly from, they all had some connection to Samoa. They all had connections to Samoa and to Hawaii. I think most of them actually probably listed Hawaii as their home, but they were Samoan. And Akebono being the most famous, but there were 4 Americans that I think there were 3 Yokozuna. You would know better than me. There were three Yokozuna, I believe, and one maybe Ozeki. And then the interesting thing, Akebono in an interview talking about the Mongolians came in the 1990s. And one thing I like about your show, because you're judo, the really interesting connection is between judo and Mongolia. That's how this happened, was that there's a judo association here, which President Batulga, by the way, is a judo champion, and he promotes judo, and they call him the judo president. And he's also officially the president of the Judo Federation, which means the Judo Federation gets more, money and attention and more support than any other sport, probably, in a way. And so there was a coach here that arranged an exchange program with a high school in Japan. I forgot the name of the high school, but it was a high school that was famous for judo. So the first Mongolians that went to Japan actually went there to study judo. And one of them made it all the way to the, at the junior level, the under 18 level, but he made it all the way to the national championships. And I believe he was in this final round of competition, or the round just before the advancing to the final round, and he got injured and he was out. And apparently the injury was so bad he was never going to practice judo again. And somehow from there he discovered sumo. He had never thought about it or known about it or anything. And somebody recruited him for sumo, and he went and lived in a stable, and he became the first Mongolian Yokozuna. And since the 1990s, there have been 3 Mongolian Yokozuna. And in fact, there's only been 4 Yokozuna promoted. 3 were Mongolian, 1 was Japanese, and that Japanese guy retired, I think, within 1 year of being promoted to Yokozuna, I guess because of injuries. So basically, yeah, Mongolians have dominated sumo for the last 30 years. And it's just interesting that the connection came through the Judo Federation and not through wrestling.
Wow. I guess that makes sense when you have the president be a big judo enthusiast, but not the actual wrestling. Wow. That's cool. Interesting. I think the forms of wrestling are so similar, yet they don't always interact.
Right.
I think that a lot of times they have kind of similar objectives, but I was wondering, by each wrestling style has different rules and objectives. Does that tell you anything about like the actual culture? For instance, America has folk style wrestling, which for some reason our collegiate whole academic style of wrestling is different from the rest of the world.
That's just America, though.
Well, yeah,
America.
Yeah,
we have a World Series that the world is not invited to compete in. We have a sport called football where you're not allowed to use your feet.
Oh, okay. Well, I always thought that folk style wrestling, compared to international wrestling, it's more about the turn, the exposure, the angle that somebody goes over, whereas American wrestling, more of a continuous, constant amount of control. So I might be kind of extrapolating a little too far, but I was like, I wonder, is there like any thing by the rules of wrestling that tell you something about the culture, even if it's just something random?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked that, and you're absolutely right. And I liked what you just said. You said that the American folk style wrestling is focused more on control. Randy Couture, who's also one of my heroes, four-time Olympian, UFC champion, oldest UFC champion, Randy Couture said that wrestling was the sport where you thoroughly dominated your opponent. And if you beat a guy in a boxing match or you beat a guy in a running or swimming or tennis or whatever, yeah, you beat him. But wrestling, you physically dominate that person and you control them. And this, to me, says a lot about the American culture. That this is, it's a very American thing. At our hearts, at our origins, we are, the pioneers that came over the ocean. We are the Native Americans who tamed the land. We're the cowboys who pushed into the West. And I don't know if you've seen a lot of John Wayne or Clint Eastwood movies, but when cowboys got injured, they couldn't call 911.
Yeah.
So there's this self-reliance, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Very American ideals here, and then it reflects in the wrestling. What is Chinese wrestling, for example, or I don't want to say about Mongolian at the moment, but if you look at most of the world, the traditional wrestling. Actually, one of the questions you sent me before this was about if wrestling is a martial art, and that wrestling is the most universal martial art that exists on the planet. Some form of wrestling exists in almost every culture in the world. And the one or two cultures that I'm aware of that do not have wrestling, this relates back to what you asked just a moment ago about how does the culture affect the wrestling. And I actually believe that in Thailand and Laos, because the head is sacred in Buddhism, they didn't want to wrestle. They didn't want to go on the ground with their head. You never want your head to touch the ground. And I've never verified that that's the reason, but I've always suspected that's why they had no wrestling. If you look at Chinese wrestling, most traditional wrestling in the world, 70-80% of traditional wrestling in the world, the win comes from making your opponent touch the ground. That's it.
This is time for the Judo Know Me podcast.
That you were in the middle of a great revelation. You broke the internet. So we had to restart over because I think they're watching it.
That's how tough wrestling is, man. It broke the internet.
All right, so we were talking about the rules and the effect on tradition and culture.
Yeah, so in most cultures, traditional wrestling is that you throw the opponent down and you win. That's the whole game, right? So like Scottish wrestling, backhold wrestling, mostly, European styles, Switzerland, different countries, Canary Islands. You just throw the guy down and you win. Even Korean wrestling, Shiram, throw the guy down and you win. Japanese sumo, you throw the guy down and you win, or you throw him out of the ring and you win. So in most traditional styles, that's what you have. But what is the American folk style of wrestling? You have to pin the guy. Now, you don't have to. I mean, there's a complex system of points and that. But the point being, you throw the guy down and it doesn't end. You have to keep fighting and fighting and fighting and pin the guy. So I really believe that there's a lot to these cultures where a certain culture thinks it's more important to dominate, and in other cultures, it's like a symbolic loss, right? You throw the guy down on the ground. Even someone who doesn't know wrestling, doesn't study wrestling, doesn't know anything about it, when space aliens come and take over and we have our new insect overlords, if they watch that competition, they're going to understand who won and who lost. Right? They're going to know the guy on the ground lost. So I really believe that. So in these other cultures, it's a symbolic loss. And the other theory I had was that in the old days when they used to fight, and you have these big armies with armor and swords and shields, and they're running at each other, thousands of guys. If somebody threw you down on the ground, you're probably going to die instantly because everybody else. Yeah. So picture these big samurai battles. Think about like even the judo, the jiu-jitsu that the samurai learned. I mean, I know that they knew submissions and they knew this and that, but at the end of the day, all they really had to do was throw you down, because once you're on your back on the ground, all the other guys are either going to stomp on you, trample you, stab you, and you're dead. Whereas the Americans were like, no, you got to go to the ground and keep fighting.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. the whole aspect. I guess that, so it's not only just a combination of what can you physically see, what can audience see? Oh, this guy is better, or this guy is stronger, or better. I guess I said better twice, but or you fall down, another person walks over. It's pretty much you got to stay on your feet in war. There's no De La Riva guard in the battlefield.
Well, I think in some cultures, and again, we could verify this because I might be making it up, but I believe in some cultures they either had women or boys that followed behind the army, just like with spears. That was their job. Just okay, if anybody falls down, stab them.
That's a sweet job.
Yeah. Yeah, but then the unions got involved and the wages, Now you do judo, right? You're a judo guy.
Yeah. And that's great that you mentioned that, because the judo philosophy, and I've heard this sort of in English and Japanese, the ippon, falling flat on your back, is like signifies the death of that person, which is not true. We train very specifically so that's not the case. In fact, if anything you get from judo is being able to fall and not die.
Right.
But the whole philosophy of the goals in competition is to have the hardest, most clean impact on their back. After that, whatever happens is irrelevant. And I think it's not the best philosophy, but it does have its benefits.
So that comes from, if you think about it, that comes from Jigoro Kano. And Jigoro Kano, remember that he studied jiu-jitsu. He knew everything. He knew submissions. He knew strikes even. He knew wrestling. And he decided to make judo 70% throws and 30% ground fighting, because he thought ground fighting was ugly and it was barbaric, and he made it all about the throws.
Mm.
And then you would know much better than me, because I only know a little bit from what I studied for my dissertation. And then beyond that, I understand that there's different schools of judo that developed, and some have more ground fighting in that. But I mean, I've read Jigoro Kano. He was a really small guy. He was an educated guy. He was a gentleman, and he just felt that. And also because it was supposed to be self-defense. And so, his feeling was like, well, somebody attacks you and you throw them on their back, you're no longer in a self-defense situation. Like, in other words, you could run away now. If you do anything else to that person, that's no longer self-defense, right? That's you're attacking them.
I think it reminds us that so much of a conflict is really about posturing. Like the other bigger dog says, "This is my land," and then maybe the other one challenges him a little bit, but as soon as it, in the wild, we can't afford to get ripped open. We don't have doctors and stuff like that. So that victory of being on top signifies, oh, I don't want to mess with this person, and conflict kind of goes away. And it's probably more easier to demonstrate. I think it's more about the posturing. And then posturing kind of has a bad image, but I think it has been used effectively in certain aspects. But as like we talked about with the American wrestlers, it's like, no, you got to absolutely control me and not allow me to do anything. Exactly.
Yeah, and American freestyle, or American folk style and freestyle, comes from the Lancashire catch wrestling. So it comes from catch wrestling originally. So in catch wrestling, you have to literally make the guy say uncle. That's
right. Those matches sounded so horrible. You had no time limit, best 2 out of 3, or you could get a submission, but you can't go to your back. And people would just come from all around to watch that. I just think that just amazes me to no end. So it's not like we had Netflix though either, but.
Well, yeah, there weren't a lot of other options that night. There was nobody in the town that you said, are you going to go watch the wrestling tonight? They're like, no, I'm going to go do the other thing. I wrestled in India last year, and 40,000 people. 40,000 people came out to watch, and there's no stadium or anything around in an open field. Today, they actually built a raised platform for the wrestling so people could see it better. But actually, that's not the norm, and it's not always done like that. It's usually still done traditionally on the ground. So it was really funny because in my dissertation research, one of the things that came up was one of the reasons for just the throwing was that these big crowds would come and watch, and they didn't have stadia back then, and they didn't have seating, so people couldn't see. And so it was easier to see if a guy got thrown down. Well, okay, you knew that who won. And if they were doing modern like freestyle wrestling or Olympic style wrestling with points and what's he doing on the ground, there's no way people could have seen that or understood it.
Now in India, is the wrestling style, at least the objective points scoring, is it kind of like international? I thought I saw them doing a lot of gut wrench and turn maneuvers and stuff like that, but I wasn't exactly sure what was happening.
So the actual style, the Kushti, it's called Kushti wrestling, Pehluwan wrestling. So the goal is to throw the guy down, but you have to make his back. You have to actually pin him. So it's one of the. There's this whole evolution of these traditional styles. Like I said, most of them it's you just throw the guy down, and then there are a few where you have to pin the guy. And so Kushti is one of the ones where you have to actually pin him. So there is ground fighting. You do have to pin him. The only thing you wear is this little briefs, but the briefs are really strong and you're allowed to grip them. So there's all kinds of throws that involve, gripping the briefs. And again, you can't really do sacrifice throws and things because you can't hit the ground first.
Okay.
And then what else? Yeah. And it's just one throw. It's just one pin. You pin the guy one time and you win the match. And the pin is not really 3 seconds. I think it's just when the referee believes that both shoulder blades are touching the ground, that's a pin.
Wow. But that's actually it's a lot harder, between getting this just a touch and getting those two shoulders. Ooh, that's a lot harder. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. One of the things I don't, people often see me posting about, I hate jujitsu, and I don't really hate jujitsu. I admire people who do jujitsu. Okay. And I admire the art, and it's scientific and it's brilliant and it's wonderful. And I admire it the same way I admire physics. It's not for me, but I really respect people who can do it,
Okay.
Or people that can add big numbers. I don't know how they do it, but, jiu-jitsu is not my thing, but one of the things that I took from jiu-jitsu to the MMA training and the wrestling training is positional training, where you start in really bad positions, where you'll say, okay, listen, why don't you get me in this headlock, or why don't you get me in this, even sometimes in a submission already, you get me in a Kimura, and we'll start from there. And I like that kind of training. And in India, it was really interesting. It's one of the only traditional wrestling that I've seen anywhere where they do a lot of training where they actually start where one guy is essentially face down and the other guy has to turn him on his back. And they'll wrestle from that position. Sometimes and again, like you said, there's no time limits. It can go 20, 25 minutes. And I remember the first time I was in India and the guy, we did that, and the guy got in that position, and I immediately got like a half chicken wing on him. And I thought, this is going to be easy. I'm just going to turn him. And I could not believe how long he was able to stay in that position.
They will not go. It's
just doesn't.
It's like their coach tells them, if you go to your back, I'm going to kill a puppy or something. They will just not go to their back.
If you do that, I'm going to eat beef. Yeah. Is that PC? Yeah,
that's probably better. Yours was more PC than mine.
Mine was more culturally
more culturally apt. Yeah.
But when I finally turned the guy, I basically got him in a double wrist lock, which is apparently illegal. And then the coach came over and yelled at me. He goes, if you ever do that in a dangal, dangal is a competition. Because if you ever do that in a dangal, those 40,000 people will storm the platform and kill you. And I'm like, okay, note to self.
Oh, that's an amazing thing what you said about a double wrist lock, because it's kind of allowed in judo and kind of not, even though that's the Kimura lock that's known around the world. But you have to do it in a very specific way. And then in wrestling, you can kind of use it too as a turnover. But if they let the arm come out to where it's potentially dangerous, you have to stop. But if they protect it like you should, you can use it for a turn.
Yes.
So, wow.
Yeah. Well, and you're even, I believe, so I don't know the rules that much of American folk style and freestyle because I never competed in the U.S., But for example, when you're turning the opponent over and you get like that that half chicken and you got your, I guess you could call it a half Nelson. I think you're allowed to use a half Nelson to turn the guy. You're not allowed to use it to submit the guy, of course. And if his face touches the mat, I assume you have to stop, because I don't think you're allowed to drive through to turn him, but you're not allowed to just like drive his face into the mat and just put all your weight on it for absolutely no reason. And there's a lot of things in folk style and freestyle that seems to be like that if you wind up in a position where, well, the guy can't turn, so you have to stop, putting pressure on him, because then it becomes a submission.
Yeah, because the objective should be to put them on their back. Yeah. Even if it's actually easier to choke them out or break your neck. Yeah, the objective should be oriented towards the pin.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. And there's even things where you're not allowed to clasp both hands or you're not. And I believe in folk style and, high school wrestling, I think you're actually not allowed, when you take a guy's back and you get one wrist control, I don't think you're allowed to hold two wrist controls, because they consider it, it's stalling and there's no way for the guy to get out and this and that. So, yes, there's a lot of rules. But the interesting thing, I don't know if everybody knows this, but it's in my dissertation and in my book on Amazon.com. But originally, when they made the first modern Olympics, catch wrestling was the wrestling style that was in the first modern Olympics. Catch wrestling was in the Olympics, I believe, 3 or 4. I think it's 3 of the first 4 Olympics they used catch wrestling. Mm-hmm. And then very much like what Jigoro Kano did when he made judo, he basically took out what he believed were the dangerous things, because he wanted women. The guy was a genius, man. The guy was a genius, He wanted women. And in this book, The Wrestler's Dissertation, this book is essentially, I wrote my doctoral dissertation in China in Chinese. And I couldn't include a lot of the things that I wanted to write about, like judo, like more about American wrestling, pro wrestling. There's little bits of it in my actual dissertation, but this book has a lot of just tons and tons of research that was not allowed in my actual dissertation. It has the interviews as well, so I wasn't allowed to put those in my dissertation. Mm-hmm. So when I finally got this book out, I was just so happy, because that to me was the completion of my PhD. Like, the actual dissertation that I defended in China was, it was, of course it was important, but this was just so much more. But in this book, one of the things was that Jigoro Kano wanted to he was like 4'11", he weighed 80 pounds or something, and he wanted to make an art that literally could be a small man could defeat a big man. And he wanted women to be able to do it, and very forward-thinking. He wanted children to be able to do it. And he was the director of the Ministry of Education at one point. And he is the father of physical education in schools in Japan. It's because of him that physical education was added to the curriculum. And they had 2 choices. They could do judo, or they could President Patuga.
Sorry, I meant to search.
Yeah, I love him. He's my other hero. They call him the Trump of the steps. But Jigoro Kano, they put judo and they put kendo as the only 2 options of physical education. And every martial art I've ever studied or ever dealt with, oh, hang on, I'm going to close my window because they got the music playing. One of the funny things about construction in Mongolia versus China is that every building in Mongolia is thoroughly insulated. My walls are probably about a foot thick, so I could repel a siege. And I believe the building could go underwater and I'd be fine. But it's really funny because most of Asia, particularly China, like everything's paper thin, and when you close the window, it doesn't reduce the noise. But
right, yeah, no, you're pretty close to the outside world.
Yeah, it's insane here. I take pictures of my windows sometimes and post them on Facebook. People can't believe it's like how thick it is. Like, well, they learned this when they breached the Great Wall and they entered China.
Right. Right.
But yeah, but every martial art, my show, Martial Arts Odyssey, it ran, I don't know, like 250 episodes, right? And there was that, and then there was the print version that we did as in magazines and things that went on from 2001. So I don't know, it's something like 12 countries, 14 countries, I don't know. And it's not even fair to say countries because I went to Borneo. Yes, Borneo is part of Malaysia, but it's its own thing, and Penang is its own thing, and Hong Kong's its own thing. So I went to a lot of places and did a lot of different martial arts. And what I'll say is a commonality is every martial art claims we teach you to use your opponent's weight and strength against him. Mm-hmm. And then we have weight divisions in our fighting competitions.
Right.
And then I get to Mongolia and they don't have weight divisions, and India doesn't have weight divisions. And judo, really, out of everything I've ever seen, judo is the only one that really, really, really taught you to use your opponent's weight and strength against him, and where a small competitor or small, defending yourself, self-defense situation, the guy has a shot at winning. And, and all the other ones, it just wasn't true. And first of all, 90% of martial arts don't even have real fighting. So, they talk a big game, but then they don't actually fight. Mm-hmm. And which is another thing I really like about grappling. When I made the transition from striking to grappling, was that grappling's the only thing, grappling, all the grappling arts, where you could go 100% with your opponent every day in training, and you don't get hurt and they don't get hurt, and you can keep going. Whereas if you were striking 100% with people, you could change somebody's personality on a single day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't take too many shots to the dome. It changes you.
You get like 6 freebies if Archer is to be believed.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's what I liked about judo. What I didn't like about it, I don't like wearing the gi, and it's the training's really hard. What a funny thing to say. I don't like it because the training's really hard. No, but I studied with Master Gary Razanan in New York while I was doing my dissertation. So what I did was I was in China training with my wrestling team, and then I'd fly to New York to see my family, and I'd go have some lessons with Gary. And I found a judo trainer in China that wound up being one of my best friends and until today. And he made it now. He's at the UFC Performance Institute. He was accepted for that program. So he's really excited. And out of all my friends, he was the one I thought least likely to ever succeed in MMA.
Oh, how did he do?
Yeah. But anyway, so he would train me, and I'd go back, and I took my test in New York. I got like my yellow belt. I was actually kind of proud of that. And then when I went back to test for the next highest belt, I don't know what it's called, but one of the problems was I don't know any of the Japanese names for any of the throws, because in China they don't use Japanese names for things.
Really?
Yeah,
they use Japanese names in France and Russia, America, but not in China. That's fascinating.
I got attacked on the internet. I posted about that. I got attacked by all these people who said I was lying and said my coach in China was cheating me, or oh yeah, this white guy is so stupid. He thinks they're his friends, but actually they're lying to him, and they're claiming they don't know the Japanese names. I'm like, dude, I was on the sports, I was at the sports university doing my PhD, and wrestling and judo are in the same room, and they trained at the same time. So I saw the judo team every single day. Plus, I had my training with them. I'm telling you right now, they do not use or even know the Japanese names for things. They try to erase the Japanese connection to judo as much as they can.
But they have.
Whereas here in Mongolia, most of the judo coaches, a lot of them were trained in Russia for, say, the bulk of their training, but they've done exchanges in Japan. Of course, they recognize Japan, and there's a picture of Jigoro Kano. That's another thing. There's a picture of Jigoro Kano in every judo gym in Mongolia. There's not in China. In China, they don't even know that name. I was showing them pictures of Jigoro Kano. Oh, I'm writing about Jigoro Sensei, and they had no idea who that was.
Wow. I'm sure with some help from the state, I'm sure that wasn't a coincidence.
Well, they're angry because the Japanese stole judo from China.
I didn't know about judo. I knew they stole karate.
They stole judo because Chinese. Have you seen Chinese wrestling? Actually, if you bring it up, Shuaijiao, Chinese wrestling. If you want to bring up a picture.
I'll just look it up while you're telling me about it, because I don't think I've actually seen it yet.
Yeah, so they wear a white gi. The jacket is really heavy, though. It's much heavier than a judo gi, and the rules are very, the throws and rules become very similar because you're wearing the gi and you're allowed to grip the gi and you can throw from the gi. So it's very similar to judo. However, it really is wrestling. And I wrote about it a lot in my dissertation that Chinese wrestling, although you're wearing a gi and there's similar rules on it, it is wrestling. So you're allowed to do single legs and double legs, and you're allowed to use like body grips are a lot more common in Chinese wrestling than they are in judo, because it is really wrestling. But they claim that the similarity proves that Japan stole it from them. And I'm like, you're an idiot. Jigoro Kano's story, makes total sense. First of all, it's documented, right? We know who started judo, Jigoro Kano. And we know what he studied. He studied several jiu-jitsu styles and, a bit of wrestling, a bit of sumo. And what's really interesting is I branched off into a lot of research I wasn't allowed to put in my dissertation. And the next book that's coming out, which I don't know when that's going to be, but the next book is my heart. It's all the things that I want to talk about, all the things that I researched. But one of the things is that if you're studying judo, the origin of judo, you have to document the origin of karate, because although it's a striking art, it happened at the same time. And it looks to me, and I don't want to say this is definitely true because there's so many great scholars on Japanese martial arts that know more than me, but it looks to me that the Japanese essentially called every martial art jiu-jitsu. There was like this, with the exception of maybe sumo, that's always been a distinct art, even kendo, because jiu-jitsu had everything. It was everything. I mean, it was kicking, it was striking, it was throws, it was submissions. And if you look around the end of the 19th century, when Japan is modernizing, the same time that Jigoro Kano is formulating judo, which he extracts from jiu-jitsu, all of the various karate styles are being formed at that time. And it's the same thing. These guys all studied jiu-jitsu. I can't remember, what's his name? Not Shotokan's judo. What's the karate style with almost, what is it?
Oh, karate?
What is
Kodokan.
Yes.
Shotokan.
Shotokan is karate, right? Kodokan was the judo. Mm-hmm. Right? And then Shotokan is the karate. Right. And that forms at the same time. And they knew each other. Mm-hmm. And their story is really similar. He studied jiu-jitsu and decided that striking was the best way. And he extracted the striking from jiu-jitsu, and then he made karate. And not just him. And again, because I was doing mostly grappling research, I didn't go research all the different karate styles, and also because I don't know enough about Japanese striking. But I think many of the karate styles are starting around this same time, and they all have a similar story. Basically people looking at this jiu-jitsu that had so many different things in it, and each of them having the idea of, I'm going to take what works best and make a style out of it. And interesting that they all had different takes on it, on what worked best and what was, and that's how you wind up with karate, and that's how you wind up with judo, and, being distinct like that. Yeah. So I find that fascinating. And Japan's one of the only countries that has real documentation. For the first 10 years I was in Asia, I was constantly involucrated in the argument between Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia, but it's mostly between Thailand and Cambodia about who started Muay Thai. Mm-hmm. And I'm heavily involved. If you Google Boktor, which is the Cambodian traditional martial art, if you Google that, my name's going to come up. Like that's how closely associated I am with that art. And I wrote about it, and I documented it, and I filmed it, and then I got it on TV. We did Human Weapon. We did what's the other one? The Fight Quest. I wrote the Fight Quest episode, but they wound up not shooting it. I've done a lot of TV shows, Japan and this and that, related to Boktor. And
can you spell that? I'm sorry.
Bokator, Bokator, Bokator.
Okay.
Yeah. Look at that. And if you Google, look at that. I'm the fourth thing that came up. It was already me.
1, 2, 3, 4 right here. Oh, yeah. This is. Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, I wrote that episode, and I was the translator, and I mean, I'm only on camera in one scene, but I was the fixer, translator, assistant producer for that episode. But we, and in fact, on the right-hand side of the search, the first thing that comes up there, that's me already.
Well, that's you, right?
That's how closely associated I am with that art. And
Wow.
And but anyway, the point is about the argument is that I kept saying to them, look, you didn't document it. This is your fault. Why didn't you document it?
Wow.
Oh, there's me. But um, the Japan, there's a list of Yokozuna that goes all the way back, I think 1675 or something. There's the documentation of who was the Yokozuna in 1675. Like, Japan has this amazing documentation of their martial arts, and in other countries don't.
Wow, that's such an amazing. I think I've actually had this discussion several times with a lot of people. We could never get to the head of it. Like, why is Japanese martial arts so prominent around the world? And it might not necessarily. I do think it is great, but I think there's also probably other great martial arts that came some weird county in Russia or Greece or Africa, but Japan did good documentation. I'd never thought about that's the key or part of the key to their success around the world.
Yeah, I'd say there's three things. Number one, Japan has great documentation. Number two, there have been Japanophiles and Chinophiles in the West for, hundreds of years. There were foreigners living in Japan for the purpose of documenting Japanese culture, language, whatever they were doing, martial arts. 400 years. As long as there have been foreigners associated with Japan. And China's the same way. And there have been departments in universities in the West specifically dedicated to studying Japan or studying China, again, for centuries. And that's not true of pretty much any other country. Did Oxford have a Thai studies department in the 19th century? I don't think they did. So, and the other thing I had was that when I started my life as a linguist, and I studied linguistics in Germany. And one of the points I made about studying American and German linguistics was that I felt like I was digging from this side and there was somebody tunneling from the other side, and we could meet, because Germany had great scholars and France has great scholars that were doing linguistics. And so we would meet in the middle. And which was very different than when I started studying about like Thai linguistics. There weren't a lot of good experts on the other side. There were certainly Thai people who know about Thai language, but they didn't necessarily know about linguistics, and they weren't writing and publishing, and that we're going to meet in the middle. And with Japanese martial arts, there's Japanese people documenting it and writing about it.
Wow.
So that's one. And then number two was that, again, Jigoro Kano sensei, Jigoro Kano was on the first Olympic committee. He was instrumental in making the first modern Olympics happen. And ultimately instrumental, although it happened after his death, was that he was instrumental in Japanese judo being accepted into the Olympics. And so Japanese judo was the first martial art, other than boxing, fencing, wrestling, that was accepted into the Olympics. And then another thing was World War II, was that the Americans that occupied Japan after World War II, a lot of them learned karate and judo, and they brought it back to the United States. So really, karate and judo were really, even President Theodore Roosevelt, practiced judo in the White House. Jigoro Kano sent judo emissaries around the world. This is where jiu-jitsu comes from. Kimura, nigga, what's his name? What's the one that Count Conte, he went to
Maeda?
Brazil. Well, yeah, Maeda, thank you. Yeah, Maeda was one of his emissaries. He had several emissaries, and the one that taught in the White House, he was one of the emissaries. And they went around the world and they challenged different martial arts, and they fought, and they opened schools, and they taught. And no other martial art has ever had such a regimented, expansion program. So this got Japanese martial arts into other countries, which is wonderful.
Wow. So actually, Kano actually opened the door for a lot of other martial arts, even besides judo. I didn't have thought of that. I always wondered how, especially in the States, and I don't want to get too off track, but I was wondering, like, how did Taekwondo get everywhere? But that might be a whole nother back wrap. But the very fact that, because Kano was how good of a self-defense principle. I think he was just really amazing at marketing for the time. Like you said, like demonstrate women throwing men or weaker people doing this. And like, yeah, it just seems like he had a great sales pitch.
When I was training in Bali, the jiu-jitsu coach in Bali, he is a fan of catch wrestling. And he would watch a lot of videos and he'd come in and talk to me. And so one day he said, and I've quoted him like 1,000, this is just such a funny quote. He goes, you know, whenever I watch these catch wrestling videos on YouTube, he goes, every major catch wrestling master in the world weighs like 260 pounds.
Right? It's a hard sell.
These massively muscled guys with like, you know, his shoulders that come up to their ears. He goes, and every catch wrestling submission starts like this. He goes, okay, first, rip the arm. And it's really funny because I posted something on, because I talked about this a lot in my dissertation, and then I talked about it even more in my new book. But one of the differences between Asian martial art in general, and you asked about culture, Judo is the gentle way, right? And jiu-jitsu, yeah, they call it the gentle way, and there's another one, the something else way. Can't remember now. But they have both, you know, sort of, you know, the gentle way and you flow and you know, and then wrestling is, Josh Barnett called it the violent way. Mm-hmm. And the difference between wrestling and judo, they're both based on leverage, both based on science, but you have to be really strong for wrestling. Strength is a huge component of wrestling, and it's not meant to be a huge component of judo or jiu-jitsu. If you're doing it right, you shouldn't have to use strength.
I see. Huh. So even though judo does get violent. I mean, it's kind of false advertising some, but the objective is to do things cleanly and purely, whereas wrestling is just work. It's like, okay, you're going to do this task. It's called wrestling. You're going to have to train a lot, work your butt off, and then maybe if you're really successful, you could work at Dick's Sporting Goods. So, you know, if you win a gold medal, you could be on commercials. But other than that, you know, it's a hard sell.
You know,
It's hard sell.
It's a hard sell. Well, you know, the wrestling motto is embrace the grind.
Right. But I don't want to work. I want money.
Yeah. I don't want that. I want money. And judo, the other thing about Kano, I think one of the reasons why he didn't want the ground fighting, number one, he thought it looked ugly, and number two, the ground fighting could get into strength and weight. Because think about it, if you're laying on top of somebody, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that was part of it too, that he felt that if you threw them properly, and that was the other thing, because he also felt, I don't want to put words in his head. I think he felt that throwing the guy perfectly was the art. And throwing the guy imperfectly and then jumping on top of him was like trying to save, you know, you've done it wrong and now you're trying to recover.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he felt that the real art, the beauty was that you threw him properly. Mm-hmm. And I also wondered if because he was such a gentleman, he felt like if you threw the guy improperly, the proper thing to do would be to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've thrown you improperly. Please stand up."
Let's try again.
We'll try again. I should give you another chance now.
I mean, the thing about when you're in a judo match, if you don't want to lose and you fall, it hurts like hell. You know, you fall on your shoulder, you fall on your side, you don't want to expose your back. But if you just go to your back, not so bad. But you want to win, right?
Yeah.
So you fall on your head.
A lot of photos where the guy or gal is being thrown and they're in the air and you see that moment of decision that I could try and fall in such a way that I remain in the game, but it's going to dislocate my shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or I can go to my back and take the fall, but I'm going to lose.
Yeah, I guess you could kind of see a split second judge that only comes from years and years of training. That's why when you throw a beginner, they do this and fall in the face. But you'd be like, do I want to lose or do I want to try again next year? Oh, yeah. Man, I've gotten so many bad. Yeah, it's mostly head because you don't want to go to your back, so you plant your head. Like, why would you do that in the street? Why? Just go to your back, you know? But it's a competition, and it seems like it governs your view of what is winning, but if I hit my head on the ground because I didn't want to fall on my back, like even dirt, I would be messed up.
Yeah, yeah.
But no,
yeah. In wrestling, a lot of times you get in this whizzer, like you're standing up and you got a whizzer on the guy. And in Mongolia in particular, when I'm training, I always think about when I get in the whizzer position, I go, it's a good control position, but if I throw the guy, I got to be really careful not to pop his shoulder out of joint, because you're training, you don't want to hurt somebody. And at the same time, if he defends, the defense of the whizzer is basically a stronger whizzer, and then he's going to pop your shoulder. And I always have to think about it because the Mongolians they're wonderful people. Like I freaking love them. I mean, I can't say enough good things about them. But when you're training with them, you got to be really careful because they will. They would take the dislocated shoulder in training, like to not lose one round in training.
Just in practice.
Just in practice. Yeah.
But they wouldn't do the same to you, would they? Or do they give you a certain benefit as a foreigner?
I have to believe that as a foreigner, and because I have white hair, that they do take it easier on me. But their idea of taking it easy is still as sparring here is harder than a lot of my pro fights. Like I've never been dropped. So when I used to box, I've been dropped in boxing. Like I had 25, I think, military fights, and I had some pro fights in boxing, and I have been dropped in boxing. Never been KO'd, but I've been dropped. But I've been dropped in sparring here, which hasn't happened in years. Like it's been years since somebody's dropped me or I've dropped somebody in sparring because you're just careful not to do that. I got hit with a knee in the chest last week. Not only did it drop me, but like it still hurts. And granted, if I was Mongolian, maybe they would have done it twice.
Wow.
Or he would have followed me to the ground and hit me in the face with his elbow. But yeah, I mean, they train really rough here. I mean, it's really, 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 really rough, which is what I like about it. But then the bad side is you got to be careful.
Right. But do you think some days you just need to okay, let's just drill and go through some stuff, but it's just hard sparring every day in Mongolia, pretty much? That's
the downside. The good side is that they train really, really rough and it suits my wrestling / MMA style rather than someone that comes from like a jiu-jitsu background, right? Because it's very rough and it's normal. Like, okay, so I got kicked out of, I'm not going to say the name of the gym, but it's 3 kilometers from my house on Long Island, and he was a world champion of both judo and MMA. But I'm not going to say the name of the gym. But I love him and I respect him and I respect everything. But I went there. I was home for Christmas. I was training there, and they didn't take any money from me. And every day I tried to pay money, and they said, "Well, let's wait." And then finally, about the 8th day I was training there, they kicked me out.
What?
Yeah, and I felt really bad. I felt horrible, and I got kicked out. And he said, "I've been watching you." He goes, "You put your hands behind the guy's head. You did knee on face, knee on throat, elbow on face.
Oh, wow.
Knuckles in the rib cage. Can opener. I watched you do all these things." He goes, "How would you like it if they did that to you?" And I go, "I train in Mongolia. They do that to me."
Wow.
This is just how we train. And one of the funniest ones, before I got kicked out, one of the funniest things that happened was so I know my limitation. I'm 53 years old. I know my limitations, and I know I don't have the speed. So what I have to do, I have to be a counter wrestler. I have to be, whether it's judo or whatever, and I have to wait till the guy attacks me and then makes a mistake. And that's what I'm looking for. So one of the things is I often wind up inside the guard, and I wind up in a situation where he's almost got the arm bar. And when he almost has the arm bar, I know how to push through, not on everybody, but let's say frequently, push through, stack him, and use wrestling to then pass the guard. But I have to wait till he goes for the arm bar because that's when he brings his legs up.
Uh-huh.
So in other words, when he brings his legs up and he's starting to get me, I go in, I can push in, and I can stack him, and I can pin him, and I can get one hand behind the head, hopefully, and then I'm going to be able to pass the guard. And that's actually how I pass the guard a lot of times. You even see it in my last pro fight. It happened too. My last pro fight, I took the guy down, wound up in the guard, and I just had to wait until. One of the things is that when a wrestler winds up in the guard of a jiu-jitsu guy, we press forward. We go up on our toes and press forward into the neck and into the face of the guy. And in catch wrestling, there's a concept of a torture hold, which means it's a submission. It's like you or a jiu-jitsu guy, when there's a white belt, there's certain submissions that work on a white belt, but it's never going to work on somebody that's been training, like little wrist locks and things, because they're just going to, roll out of it, right? And so there's a torture hold, which means it's a submission that you do that you're never going to submit anybody, but it just hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just annoying, and you just do it to to get dominance, to piss him off, to hurt him, to whatever, force him to react. And so when a wrestler wants him to guard, you stand up on your toes, push all your weight forward with your elbow or your forearm or this bone in your wrist. And he's pushing into the face, under the nose, into the throat, putting your knuckles onto the chest or the ribs, into the abdomen. The guy goes for the arm bar, and you just put both of your knuckles into his abdomen. And the more he squeezes, it just drives it. So it's just all this kind of stuff. So I was doing all that stuff. And he said to me at one point, he goes, he almost got an arm bar on you. And the only reason he didn't is because you pushed through and grabbed his head. I'm like, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So he kicked me out, and I felt really bad. And I got home and I called my coach in Malaysia, and I just said, Coach, I said, I got kicked out of the jiu-jitsu gym. And he goes, look, those guys are there to do jiu-jitsu. You weren't there to do jiu-jitsu. You shouldn't even be there. He goes, they're there to do jiu-jitsu, and they want to learn jiu-jitsu techniques and how to defend, using jiu-jitsu. He goes, you want to learn to fight, and you're going there to fight with them. And he goes, it's not right. And he goes, and also you have to remember that they all have full-time jobs, and they can't afford to get hurt, and they don't want to get hurt. And these guys that on their lunch break are paying $60 to go in there and learn jiu-jitsu. He goes, and that's not what you were doing. He goes, and you shouldn't have been there. I said, okay. And I felt really bad.
I think that's a common problem. I'm sure a lot of people have. Each art has a culture, but each gym has their own culture and certain unspoken rules. It's hard to read, and it can cause some bad. I've actually had that experience with some of my first gyms, especially from people with multiple backgrounds. So I really feel for that. Do you have any advice on kind of how to kind of read the gym or find out if it's for you, or what's the right protocol?
I don't know, because one of the things that happened, he yelled at me once.
When they yell at you, that's a sign, maybe.
That's bad. And then a few minutes later, he yelled at me again. And then the third time, I was in a position where I was about to grab behind the guy's head, and I go, okay, they don't want me to grab behind the head. So I said to him, I go, is it okay if I push off his face? And then he just got really mad. He's like, I told you not to do that shit, And I was like, I know, I'm trying to follow I'm asking. I didn't do it.
And the more you ask, the more it seems like you're patronizing or something.
That's what he thought.
I see. Yeah.
Well, to him, everything I do was a pack. When he said don't do it, he meant don't do anything that you ever do.
At all.
At all. So I'm like, what do I do? Just lay here and let the guy submit me every time? Okay, here's my arm. Thank you. Tap.
Well, I actually had that problem when I went to a boxing gym, because every time somebody ties up in a boxing way, it's the most ridiculous stance that they'll just fall over so easy. And I wasn't I guess what you have to do, you have to wait for the ref every time, and then, or something like that. But it's sometimes the ref doesn't break. But if you just let go, they could pop you right in the nose. So I was really perplexed. I didn't know what to do in the boxing gym, especially when they grabbed me, and they would grab me with this really bad double over thing. And I was like, I could totally launch this fool. What's he doing? And then I didn't launch, but I just kind of gently guided them to the ground because they didn't have their feet under, and that caused some bad politics.
Right.
So, which I understand, and I tried to not do that, but the more it happened, the more he seemed to keep tying up with me in that same fashion, and I was like, and I just tried to be a diplomat about it. But
you make the good point that if you break, he's going to punch you.
Right. His hands are on top of mine.
Yeah.
His hands are on top, so if I break, he's going to punch me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but if you hold me in a stupid way where it's easy for you to fall down, why wouldn't I just make you fall down? But I understand you got to respect the sport. But that was just a weird moment, So I feel.
Yeah, that's a really good example. So that's why now I pretty much only train in MMA gyms. because of that. So MMA, we do a lot of we'll do like boxing, but you're allowed to throw the guy, so because you have to train those reflexes too. It's really important. I think that it's important to separate out your skills and refine your skills, but I think it's very important to train your reflexes and you never want to be in a position that instinctively you just grab them and take it, and then you don't do it because of the rules that day. That's not good, because you need those reflexes, because when you go in a fight, you don't want even a second's hesitation, right?
Mm-hmm. That's a really amazing concept. I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, MMA is the way now, and it's like the best martial art. And I used to think so too. But do you think like there's anything you might miss from just training martial arts that the traditional route could kind of give you instead?
Yeah, definitely. So my coach, so when I fought in 2011, I wasn't in the UFC in 1993, right? So I didn't get to grow with MMA in America, but I did in Malaysia. I mean, I was in their first ever fight, and then, still fighting, and I fought in Malaysia last year. So it was really neat to be part of that development. And that was one of the points my coach brought out. My coach was winning all his fights, and I was winning all my fights, and we both came from traditional martial arts backgrounds. And slowly we started having kids showing up at the gym. We go, what's your martial art? Oh, MMA. They'd never done other martial arts. And we noticed a huge difference. And one of the things we used to talk about in 2011, 2012 was we go, those kids that don't have a background in something else, when push comes to shove, at that time I was still boxing. So it's like, when push comes to shove, if I'm losing or if I'm getting overwhelmed, I'm going to box. I'm going to fall back on my box. When you're in a crisis, you fall back on the thing you drilled 8 million times.
Okay.
And I'd box, and I'd boxed since I was 12 years old. I go, I'm going to box. And my coach was a phenomenal Muay Thai fighter and he'd fought all up on the border of Thailand and all that. He'd had God knows how many fights. Same thing. He goes, and his jiu-jitsu was great, his MMA was great, but he goes, but if push comes to shove, I'm going to, my body's going to instinctively do Muay Thai. And then when we had these kids that, my martial art is MMA. Well, when push comes to shove, they had nothing in the tank. They had nothing special, nothing in reserve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So your backup foundations. I guess if it's like, oh, I want to learn to fight. Okay, well, I'll show you everything. You're probably going to suck at everything for a long time.
Yeah.
But honestly, for instance, wrestling for MMA, obviously people's stances are higher. You got to worry about getting hit. But, wrestling takedowns seem to work in a different fashion. Similar principles of how you get the takedown. And it's like, I guess, but I think that wrestling foundation of knowing how to get it on a shot, and that they know the reaction, they know when's the right time to sprawl, when's the right time to hip check, when's the right time to whizzer, then you're going to react differently. Like if you're like, oh, this guy's just a kickboxer, I guess.
Right.
Right. And so I feel like, yeah, especially with wrestling, if anything, even if you don't, I actually hate international wrestling because I hate gut wrenches, because I think they look cool, but they're absolutely useless. But the power that it gives you to practice that technique, I feel like that's gained me in other areas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the interesting, so in my book, one of the points I brought up, and this gets back to the culture thing, judo, on paper, judo should be the dominant art or one of the most dominant arts in MMA. In reality, it has not played out that way. Other than the fact that just a lot of the Japanese guys just happen to have a black belt in judo the same way that a lot of the Korean guys happen to have a black belt in taekwondo. But right. Judo has not, in fact, like Karo Parisian, there was this camp of Armenians in the States, and they were all judo champions, and they all did really well in MMA, but none of them became champions. And, in general, judo just hasn't done super well in MMA. And although on paper it looks like it would be the best thing in the world. And wrestling consistently has been the art where you ask the guy afterwards, you go, how much MMA training did you have before you won that pro fight? And they'll go, none. Like, there's so many of these guys. That's their story. They're like, yeah, no, I was training and somebody said something about it and I signed up and, I went in and I won. And my theory is that wrestling, because it's like just tough, it's just the grind and you're used to getting hit, You get hit all the time, like heads and stuff. I'm looking at your ears. You know all this.
I might.
You're part of the club, but yeah, I mean, it's just so much rougher, and you're just used to rough and getting hit and getting pain and I'm not saying that every wrestler can go in and win in MMA, but I'm just saying it's one of the few arts where the guy had no other training and he goes in and he stands a chance. Whereas like there's so many examples of like world Muay Thai champions that they put them in an MMA fight and they just got decimated like instantly, 2 seconds into the fight, he's on his back,
Yeah.
So I think traditional background is very important, and I think it's good to answer the first question. But I also think that, interestingly, as we've had the shakeout over the last 30 years, it's quite obvious that wrestling is kind of the dominant art. Now, the other art, when I was searching Martial Arts Odyssey, I was wondering if there was an art somewhere on a mountain somewhere that nobody heard of, that was going to be like the next thing, the next great thing. Because jiu-jitsu really came out of nowhere. No one predicted jiu-jitsu was going to be
Brazilian jiu-jitsu?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no one predicted that, in the 90s and early 2000s. Nobody predicted Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was going to win. I still remember commentary. I think it was Bill Superfoot Wallace was one of the Bill Superfoot Wallace, I believe, was one of the.
What was his name? The one Olympic wrestler was Blacknick, Jeff Blacknick?
Yeah, Blacknick. Blacknick was one. Jeff Blacknick.
And of course, Jeff Blacknick loved all the wrestlers. So
yes,
I don't suspect Gracie could just finish this Dan Severn from this position,
But there's a quote from, I believe it was Bill Superfoot Wallace. It was a quote. He goes, okay, now this Royce Gracie, he does jiu-jitsu. So look for him to throw kicks and punches that are so important in that art. But they were thinking of Japanese jiu-jitsu. And Ken Shamrock even said that he lost because the minute he saw the gi, he just assumed, that it was some jiu-jitsu karate from Japan, and so he was just going to dominate.
Even Ken was in the dark.
Yeah, nobody knew.
Oh, okay.
Nobody
I would
knew.
have thought Ken, because Ken had been to Japan and stuff like that, and I thought maybe he might have at least heard of it.
Yeah, nobody knew. No, because if he was in Japan, he would have heard of Japanese jiu-jitsu maybe. And those guys can't generally, because they're doing everything, so they're not nearly as good, at wrestling as Brazilian jiu-jitsu, where they're doing that 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big difference. So nobody predicted that. Nobody predicted wrestling. Nobody predicted wrestling. I still remember the debates. You did. How old are you, if I may ask?
36.
Okay, so maybe when you were growing up, maybe it was a little bit of a thing. When I was growing up, it was a big thing because there was nothing. There was no fighting. There was only boxing and point karate. And there were always debates in school. Could a kung fu guy beat a karate guy? And we were generally basing it on comic books. Like,
yeah, this is our citation.
Like, if Power Man could beat Master of Kung Fu, or Iron Fist could beat,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But nobody predicted wrestling. And what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So my first 10, 12 years, I was going around, I was looking for that thing. The only martial art I ever found that I believe is like the missing component of MMA. If you say that MMA has basically 4 components and it's, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, boxing, and Muay Thai. And then if there's a 5th component, Chinese Sanda. So my major at the university was wrestling, but you don't really have a minor, but my unofficial minor was Sanda, and I did all my other research and training with Sanda. And the thing about Sanda is that it's kickboxing, but it incorporates the throws from Chinese wrestling, and so much of it is catching the kicks and throwing. Mm-hmm. And what I liked about Sanda is that Sanda is essentially the only art, except maybe Sambo. It's one of the only arts that teaches you to transition from striking to takedown.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, because if you look at the early wrestlers, like you look at the Mark Coleman, like that era of early wrestlers, when they tried to strike, even Dan Henderson, who I love, Dan Henderson could strike, and he has a lot of wins by KO, but it's literally I am now in striking mode. I will strike.
Yeah.
I will now switch to wrestling mode and I will take you down. Whereas the Chinese Sanda is, it's a very smooth transition because it's natural. They train it all the time. Ba, 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 take down, ba, 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 take down, kick, take down,
I've seen some of it before too. I've only seen it, and I always thought it was really amazing. I always wondered, like, how come I'm not seeing this on TV? But I don't know. Is it bigger in China, or is it still kind of obscure?
Oh, so it's huge in China in the sense that it is probably the most common professional fight sport in China. And there are fights going on like every day, everywhere. But China, and I talk about this a lot in my dissertation, China has a population of 1.4 billion, but the US dominates them in so many areas. And it's because the US utilizes its population of 334 million through equality. Whereas in China, for example, China has 1,000 wrestlers.
1,000.
1,000. Long Island has like 12,000. like if Long Island and China got in a fight, Long Island would win. Yeah, because the U.S., we have wrestling in every high school. It's paid for by the government, and you can do wrestling and still graduate high school, graduate college, get a degree. In China, they have the old Soviet style. You're identified at age 5 or 6, and then you go off to live in the sports school. And if you don't become a champion, or if you get injured at some point, they drop you, and you have nothing. Or you become a champion, and then you have nothing. Like there's just nothing, right? And it's like I love reading. Like Matt the Hammer Hamill has a degree in electrical engineering. There's a funny, if you've seen the Smashing Machine documentary, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, I've seen it. Mark Kerr.
Mark Kerr, and they're doing a movie now, and The Rock is going to play Mark Kerr. But
it would be awesome.
In that documentary is so funny. There's a scene where they go and they interview a wrestling friend of Mark Kerr, right? And he's wearing a suit and tie, and he's in an office, and he goes, Mark Kerr came to me and said, I figured out this way that we could make money off of our wrestling. And he shows him the video of his fight in Brazil. And the wrestler guy, he kind of shakes his head and he goes, I saw that video and I decided I was going to become the best salesman in the world for my company. And the camera pans back and his office is full of all these sales trophies. Salesman of the year.
I'll have to watch it again. I didn't that part. I think.
Yeah, it's so fun. It's so funny because a lot of what I wrote about in my dissertation, and I do it more in the new book, because the new book I don't have any restrictions by the Chinese government in that, but it's just about how the wrestlers in China, the athletes, just wind up with absolutely nothing, and they're not educated. My best friend, my teammate, who is my best friend to this day in China, one of my best friends in the world, the guy's a retard. I mean, just not a smart guy, but loyal friend. I mean, if somebody if anybody ever did anything to me, even said something bad about me, not only would he attack them, but you would have to shoot him like a lot.
A lot, not just once.
Not just once. I mean, he's like a Rottweiler, and he's just that kind of a friend, and but he's just dumb as. He's just dumb as this, and he knows it, and he tells me all the time. He's like, "Yeah, no, I'm not smart. I don't know how to make money. I don't know how to do anything. I don't know how to do anything." He tells me that. He's like, "I don't know how to do anything." I'm like, "Yeah, you know who you are, though," and he's really happy and whatever. But just the point being, and he's lucky because his parents are rich, so he's fine. But so many of the athletes. I got a contract. This is really hilarious, man. I got a contract. This is so funny. I got offered a really huge contract. By a company in New York that was opening a school in China, a string of schools. They wanted me to go in and be the principal, superintendent. And I go, where is it? They go, Weifang. And I go, listen, I live in Shanghai, and I hate Shanghai. I go, anything else in China is going to be less developed. It's going to be even worse. I'm going to hate it more. I go, I can't move to Weifang. And they just kept increasing the money. And I was like, all right, here's the deal I'll make you. I'm going to go through the roster of all my wrestling, because it's in Shandong province and all the wrestlers come from Shandong province. I go, I'm going to go through the list of all the wrestlers on my team. If there's one in Weifang, I'm going to move to Weifang and take this job. And so I called Zheng Tong, who's my best friend. I go, Zheng Tong, you know all the wrestlers. Do any of them live in this place called Weifang? He goes, I live in Weifang.
Really? That's nice.
Yeah. So I moved to Weifang. And then part of my contract was that they built me a wrestling room at the school, and then I hired Jung Tong and as my wrestling coach. And then we're driving around, like when I first get there, we're driving around, we're reminiscing, this person, that person. I go, oh yeah, and what happened to your younger brother? He was a good wrestler. He goes, oh yeah, he's still here. He usually hangs out on that street corner.
Okay.
Sure enough, he's like hanging out on the street corner. We pick him up in the car. By the end of the day, we picked up like all these old wrestlers. Like they're just hanging around on the street corner. Oh yeah, no, he hangs out in front of the pool hall, you know. And like this is what happens to them.
Wow. Cool. Oh, let me plug in my battery.
So you wrestled in the States too before you did judo, or parallel to judo?
Yes, I wrestled in high school. I didn't take it seriously. But then when I joined the Navy, I started wrestling with Noda-san on bass and Miyabe. Who I think
Oh, right. Yeah, I heard about that from Scott, right?
Yeah, and before they did freestyle wrestling, and that was like a big awakening to me because I always thought wrestling was kind of boring. You just grab the leg and pull them down, right? But I was actually kind of inspired by UFC too, and I think a lot of people came and went that were, and like they would try and do these jump guillotines and stuff like that. But it was like, no, you have to stay off your back. No, stay off your back. And so that's where I started. Though, so when I went back, I wrestled in a community college, and before I left Japan, for some reason, I started judo that year in 2006, and for some reason, I had to leave in August, and for some reason, my teacher gave me a black belt. And I was totally not qualified for that because I wrestled. I just kind of pinned everybody, or at that time, they weren't so strict in judo with the, now they're very strict. If you take people down and they don't go to their back, you'll get kind of warnings. But then they're all white belts, so I got a lot of pins. And so he gave me and I bought him a bunch of steak from on base and some cheap jewelry. And then next thing I know, he gave me a black belt before I left Japan, which was kind of a curse because I came back and I lived in Seattle and I thought I was a black belt, but I got smashed when I competed against other black belts because they saw me coming. But like, oh, this guy looks like he wrestled. He's probably going to try and grab my legs. I'm going to control his collar. He's going to hate that. And I'm going to, launch him. So it was a painful experience, but I think by now I'm actually a black belt 12 years later, But
you know what? Your teacher knew. He knew.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's how I started judo. And judo was like really the first time when I saw Japanese people as people. Like I always thought they were just some kind of mystical beings. But they had the same problems I had, and the kids didn't listen, and not everybody followed the rules. Sometimes people got, Hansaku Maki'd and lost the tournament, and it was a big eye-opening experience for judo for me. So
we have in Malaysia, which is my home gym for MMA, and we have a Japanese sensei who teaches jiu-jitsu there. And he's a little older than me. He's like 57 or something. He's just ripped. Every time he's changing his clothes, it's like he's like 57 years old. But whenever the other senseis are teaching, I thought, well, I should pick him out as my partner because we're both older and, we're both teaching and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I noticed he didn't like it, so I don't do it anymore. And I don't know the culture in Japan. And I was just wondering, because the first couple times we trained together, the first thing I did was I pinned him because I go, wow, this guy's jiu-jitsu. I don't want to get submitted and, choked and hyperextended. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to pin him and kind of hold him. And so I remember I did it once. And then the next time we trained together, he goes, oh, can do nothing. Can do nothing. Because I did, he just couldn't move. And I was like, well, yeah. But then I realized, okay, this is probably horribly disrespectful. So actually, we never wrestle each other anymore.
Wow. So is there I was always kind of interested about how is a martial art or combat sport taught? based on your experience, I guess you don't have to rank it in 1 to 10, but have you noticed any martial art that was like really had a really good pedagogy or really taught well, and then one that like really didn't?
So, okay. So here in Mongolia, the wrestling, because I forgot, we're supposed to talk a little bit about Mongolia, but the wrestling here is natural. So when they're little boys and they're out on the steps, they just play wrestling, and no one actually teaches them anything. And they just play, and it's like their main form of play. They just play wrestling. Okay, and then they're herding sheep, and when you herd sheep, you have to wrestle them when you feed them, or not feed them, but maybe when you do medical on them, and when you shear them, and when you have to wrestle. So it's like the wrestling animals.
Mm-hmm.
And then somewhere, and then the Naadam festival comes, once a year, and Sagansar, the new year comes, and they have wrestling tournaments. And these kids who have no training actually just go, it's just a thing. Like you take your kid to Little League, you just take your kid to the wrestling tournament, and you buy him a little outfit, and he goes out there and he wrestles, and he's really had no training at all. And they grow up like that. And the other thing is they ride horses. And so you've done martial arts, horse stance, which you can put most martial artists in horse stance, and after 90 seconds, right, they want to die. These guys are really in horse stance on a real horse, like 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Their thighs, the average Mongolian wrestler's thighs are double the size of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And my thighs are pretty big. And so they grow up this very, very natural. So that's the good part of Mongolian wrestling. So they grow up very natural. If they get identified as a kid that is interested and his parents want, and if they have the opportunity to go to the sports training center and learn freestyle wrestling, they get some instruction, but they don't do the drilling that you do in America. Mm-hmm. They don't do the step-by-step, and they never learn the step-by-step. So really? There's good and there's bad to that, but that is the biggest difference. I would say that the American way, or particularly Japanese way, oh my God, right? Very regimented, very step-by-step. This is so one of the guys here wrestled he's Mongolian, but he wrestled at St. John's in America, and he was a 3-time All-American. And this guy is like a godsend because he speaks perfect English, and he wrestled in both countries. He's one of the few people that can give you, there's 3 of them that went together actually. And those 3 guys are going to be so instrumental in the book that I'm writing about Mongolia because they understand both sides. And that was one of his points. He goes, in America, the coach goes, your head goes here, your eyes should be looking that way, your shoulder. They never happen in Mongolia, never. The coach will come out, throw a kid once or twice, and go, okay, everybody else do this 100 times. And he goes, so the advantage, though, is that in Mongolia, your personality comes through. And he felt that in some ways in America it was too technical. He goes, because every coach is teaching this step-by-step the same way, and the wrestlers look the same.
Formulaic. It's not really doesn't have the motion behind it. Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was his feeling. So he said on the one hand, the American way was better, and then on the other hand, the Mongolian way was better because your personality came through. And he goes, and you're not doing it perfectly. But look, between you, me, and, don't tell anybody this, but if you don't do it perfectly, but you do it 1,000 times, you're probably going to get that throw on most people. It's still going to work. Like you just figure out a way that it works. Because I get that all the time. Because so much of my training was I've never been in one gym for a very long period of time, and I learned a little bit from this master, whatever. So there's a lot of things, and I'm doing it totally wrong, right? But it works most of the time, right? And it's always kind of shocking to me when this thing that's like my go-to move, and then somebody who really knows that, you're doing that wrong. I'm like, really? After 20 years, I'm doing this wrong? And I don't disagree, but yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. I think I remember, I wish there were sometimes somebody could have told me something. For instance, when I wrestled in college, and I would sit out, and it would work every time on people that sucked. And then when I started going against good guys, I would almost get stuck sometimes. The one time it's don't sit out when somebody's got a hold of your chin.
Right.
You tell me that 5 years ago.
Right.
Because that makes a hell of a difference. Don't sit out when somebody's got head control on you.
And it's such a small thing.
Every time.
Such a small thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out on lateral drops, wizard lateral drop, anything where I've got control of the upper body, how much control I have to do before I drop to make sure that I wind up on top rather than, the guy winds up on top of me. That's something I'm still struggling with. And there's a lot of times I don't take the drop because I'm afraid I don't have enough control. And there's been a few times I took it. I said, you know what, let's just take it and see what happens. And I wind up on the bottom. It happened to me last night. So,
really?
yeah. And that might be something that a good coach would be able to tell me.
I think with a lateral drop, I think the problem is a lot of people try to just do a lateral drop, but lateral drops work because they're worried about something else.
Right,
like,
right.
If you do like a hard forward shot, even if you're not really trying for a double leg, but they have to brace for that,
right.
then I find it a better opportunity to do a lateral drop. But if you just go right out the gate, somebody good's going to feel you start to fall, and they're going to act accordingly. Yeah. But if they're like, oh, shit, this guy's trying to blast me off the mat, they push back, then I've had success with it. And even some guys are even good. Even if you get them to their shoulder, it still might be a scramble. But the more surprise you have in that drop, I find has a higher level of success. Yeah. But
that makes sense.
It's a hard move. It's a top level move. Even if you do it right. Yeah.
Last week I had the guy and I wasn't sure if I had enough control to drop, right? I go, I need just a little something extra. And just as I was thinking I need something a little extra, he tried to throw me. And that's the extra that I needed. Yeah, then I just pushed into his throw and took him down. But it was so funny. I'm like, oh, if I could get them to do that every time.
Right? If only you could just read people's minds.
Yeah. But so as far as the training, the good and the bad, so here they just do sparring. Like the MMA gym, it's literally they come in, everybody does the same workout, which is another problem. I wrote a paper on this for a company in China. They wanted to open they weren't sure if they want to do a fitness gym or like an MMA, like real professional gym, and then they get money from the fighters and whatever. And I said to them, I go, you can't do both. A lot of people think we'll combine, but you can't. And so like the gym here, they combine both. But remember, the population here is so small. I mean, you can't specialize that much. You wouldn't be able to stay open. And in most situations, the fitness people are supporting the gym. That's the money that supports the gym. And a lot of MMA gyms have taekwondo in the afternoon for kids, and people are always like, what the hell is the MMA gym doing with taekwondo? It's like, yeah, because that pays the bills. And MMA starts later anyway because it's adults, right? So it starts after 6 or 7 o'clock, when people get off work. So you put a taekwondo in there at 4 o'clock, and those kids come religiously, and the parents pay the money, and that keeps the gym open, and that way you can have your MMA. But anyway, here at the MMA gym, they have people there that are doing fitness, trying to get in shape. The quote, I got a great quote. I interviewed that wrestler that wrestled in the States, and he goes, yeah, Mongolian people are really starting to care about their ass.
Not just their sheep, but their asses too.
Yeah, they're just basically meaning fitness was starting to become a thing in Mongolia, and dieting and stuff. But so there's people that join the gym, they just want to keep in shape. But those people, like the accountant in your company in Mongolia, could beat up like a low-level MMA fighter in another country.
The accountant. And then give them an invoice afterwards of completely
It just kills me, man. It kills me that I was working at a company and I'm looking over at the IT guy and I'm thinking, that guy knows how to pick out which sheep is better. Like he's a really good IT guy, but he also knows about sheep. That's insane. Because it's a country that's transitioning from nomad to modern, with computers and internet and all over a period of 30 years. So, and the population of the capital has almost doubled in 30 years. That means 50% of the people in the capital were born, on the steppes.
Wow.
I've never seen a country transition like that.
Well, it is exceptional on some levels. I mean, with the whole, you can't say everybody's Genghis Khan, but he was a pretty exceptional guy. Wow.
Yeah. And so in the training, so in the gym, and this is a lesson for everybody that wants to open a gym. So you got the people coming there for exercise and fitness and maybe a little self-defense. And then you got the fight team training right alongside them. And it's not good. And they come in and they all do the same running, the same stretches, the same warm-up, same exercises. And that's about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And when I'm watching it, I'm watching all the new people, the normal people struggling, and it's really too much for them. And for the
Uh-huh.
fighters, it's not enough. And they don't recognize that. And it's not changing and that's the other thing, that when you have like the fitness type gym, the level is the same every day because people come and go.
Uh-huh.
The level for your fight team should be increasing, or maybe that you would have hard days and easy days. But you don't generally do that when you have just like a regular, it's open to the public, you join and, you come and exercise. It's kind of at the same level every day. Whereas when you have a fight team, you might say to them, okay, Tuesdays, we're going to do all upper body strength. And, Wednesday's going to be our hard cardio day. And Thursday's our kill you day, whatever it is. Yeah. And that doesn't happen in these gyms where it's open to the public. And that's a huge disadvantage here. They can't really afford to have, because first of all, the fighters can't afford to even pay tuition, right? So those normal people are supporting the gym.
Wow, that's a really tough spot. Yeah, I remember the best workouts of places just with absolute crummy floors and so a bag in the corner and you just get a good workout and you know the people, but yeah, as opposed to like, oh, this place is too nice, I don't know if I'm going to get a good workout here. But they have
right.
They have
it's too
to make
clean.
that investment.
Yeah. But the funny thing, though, again, it's still Mongolia. So even those normal people, like, they'll get in there and just like fight. Like, they're so tenacious, man. The good things of the Mongolians is like that Genghis Khan thing is real. I mean, it's real. They all talk about it. Dude, I interview people at like the Bank of Mongolia or like the major think tanks, for my economics work. In those meetings, the name Genghis Khan comes up, and certainly the word nomad comes up frequently. Like frequently, the government will take some decision about investment and how they're investing in this mine as opposed to that. Well, as a nomadic people, we're good problem solvers and we're self-reliant. And I'm like, this comes up in like these major think tank meetings. Like,
oh wow! So it's not just like a stereotype where like actually I'm a computer program, so I don't like being compared to a sheep herder. Most people are very much proud of that.
The people here are. So I got attacked. I had a story run in the South China Morning Post a few weeks ago. I wrote about Mongolia had no coronavirus deaths and no domestic infections. Nobody got infected here in Mongolia. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that was cited was Genghis Khan. And in my article, I said that, and I got attacked by this consortium of intellectuals around the world. They wrote a letter, and Antonio Graceffo's a hack, and he's a horrible person, and he's a white supremacist, and all this Orientalist, exoticizing the culture. And what kills me is after they said all that, I was more aware at all my next meetings how many times the word nomad came up, how many times. Because we eat good meat and good milk and we have the fresh open skies and our nomadic history came up in like every meeting here. People are aware of it. And they're very proud of it. And wow. Debt trap diplomacy. I don't know how much you're up on global economics, but this is my work. And like China makes these loans to these countries to build infrastructure, and then they wind up in debt to China, and then China influences them politically. And I was at a meeting here, and the guy, this is a international, he was trained at the diplomatic academy in a foreign country, like speaks English better than me, knife and fork school, the whole thing. And he says to me, he goes, yeah, the Americans talk about debt trap diplomacy as if we're stupid and can't do our own economic modeling. He goes, because we've done the economic modeling. And at the end of the day, if push came, he says this, he goes, if push came to shove, we could all abandon the city and go back to the steppes and raise our sheep.
Wow. If they needed to, they could do that. Wow.
Yep. Nobody's ever going to dominate us, and nobody's ever going to, take control of our country because we are independent. I was like, oh my God.
Wow. That's something you can't get from, wow. That's amazing.
Yep. And I wish those people who attacked me could go to these meetings and hear this is the top 1% of Mongolians that are in Mongolia, and they're telling me this.
Right.
So no, I didn't invent this, but this is the only country, and Japan's probably the other one, but I haven't studied there. This is the only country where the rhetoric about we're a warrior people and we have a proud history, like, yeah. You go to Thailand, they tell you, our Muay Thai fighters are so good because we have this warrior history, this and that. I'm like, really? Well, there's 120,000 Muay Thai fighters in Thailand, which is a lot, but your population is whatever 20 million or whatever it is. Like the other people aren't doing anything. They're doing nothing.
Okay, so it's not just a select group of people versus a culture as a whole has this certain kind of.
And in a way, it's the way what I've read about Japan, and more because I haven't lived there, but what I've read about Japan, that the families that were samurai, that when they made the transition and the modernization, a lot of these guys, if you're from that family, you became like a CEO. And in the office, they'll still have the sword, and they still believe in Bushido, but it's taken the form of business as opposed to.
Yeah, I think unlike in Japan, I think they still have kept the culture, but I think it means something very, very different.
Right.
Yeah.
But even if the meaning changed, it's there, and they do believe in it. They just took it in a different direction.
I think they take it too far, but I'm not going to get into that. But I mean, some have with because there's a strong right in Japan too, and completely independent of strong right in the U.S. But yeah, so the whole idea of a samurai, it's a powerful symbol.
Yeah. Whereas Cambodia, for example, like they're always telling me, because I'm involved with their martial arts, and they'll say to me like oh, we're warriors and this. I'm like, really? Well, why were you a French colony for 150 years?
Right.
Why is your country like a quarter of the size that it was 100 years ago? Like, no, I don't want to take anything away, but it's just that imagery. So many countries try and tell you that, but you just don't see it. But here I see it. Like I see it even in business meetings, that people saying, the steps. And the other funny thing is like, the minute we get outside of Ulaanbaatar, I don't care who I'm with. It could be the CEO of a bank. The second we break the barrier of Ulaanbaatar and you see those rolling hills, they change. They instantly change.
Really?
Yeah, instantly.
I was wondering if there was some second generation, third generations grew up in the city and it's still kind of awkward for them, but even the second generation.
There are probably the young kids, but they would be really young because remember that it's only since 1990, and But you're right. There are probably second and third generation Ulaanbaatar kids, but then maybe I don't meet them because I wrestle and I do banking, and they're not either of those. They're too busy playing video games. But yeah, it really amazes me that I'll be with like even high ranking people. Well, in fact, last weekend I got invited to a birthday party of one of my wrestling friends, and it turns out his family owns a resort, and the resort's only like 20 minutes outside the city. And of course it's already just rolling green hills and sheep and horses, and it's just beautiful. To get to the resort, and there's all these rich city people, obviously, that stay there because, poor people don't stay at resorts. And he was asking me about helping him market his resort. And I go, well, what activities do you have here? He goes, oh, no, we don't have any activities.
Okay.
So for Mongolian people, like just being outside the city and being in this resort, that's what they want. Like they were just so happy. Like that was enough for them. They're like, oh no, you see, we have the blue sky. And they always talk about the blue sky. And in the shamanistic belief, like the blue sky was a big deal. And on the flag, the blue on the flag, it's a very big deal. And they're like, yeah, we have our blue sky and, and fresh air and lamb meat. And they're just like so happy just to be there. And these are rich people,
Wow, I went to a sumo basho earlier this year, and there was actually a Mongolian restaurant like just nearby. And man, it was good. It was just literally sheep and salt and pepper. And it was so freaking amazing. I oh my God, I can't believe it. I was like, what do you put on it? Like, oh, we put, and she thought about it, salt. And then 2 seconds later, little pepper. And that sumo wrestler that owned that restaurant, I think his name was Hakuba, which is like white horse.
Hakuba.
Yeah, I don't know if he's from the same gym as Hakuho, who's Yokozuna now. But yeah, so we actually saw him. I mean, he had his hair cut off, and my father-in-law wanted to talk to him. But
I love it, man.
that
It's
just
such a
reminded me of
crazy
that.
connection.
Blue salt, and it's like when you ask a place, "Oh, what kind of wine do you have?" "Oh, we have red and
White.
Yeah,
We have both kinds.
Wow. So I think that leads really, really well about what you got coming up. Tell us a little about this. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Nadam?
Nadam, yeah.
Nadam
So
event?
Nadam is the first Nadam was inaugurated by Genghis Khan in 1206.
Okay.
And it was the celebration of the three sports of men, which are archery, horse racing, and wrestling, whereby wrestling is the main event, of the tournament, of the celebration. It signifies a lot of things. It signifies the connection to Genghis Khan. It signifies the birth of the Mongolian Empire. The empire is officially, let's say, declared. Yes, and that 1206 is kind of like the official declaration that we are an empire. It's the Mongol Empire, and the Nadam was a celebration of that, and so it's still celebrated today as the anniversary of the empire. It's also celebrated as the anniversary of the founding of the Mongolian People's Party, and it has a lot of different significances associated with it. And for Mongolian people, my feeling was, and then I confirmed this through my interviews, that a lot of Mongolian people feel like they want the country to modernize. They all use the internet, the international banking, they're learning English. Just absolutely amazing how much they've embraced development. And a lot of them, one of the quotes I had, the guy goes, Nadam is like a vaccination. He goes,
Okay.
it's to prevent the virus of, modernizing too quickly. That it's a time of year that everybody wears their traditional clothing, and you go and you do all these very traditional things. Most people like to leave the capital and they go back to their home village or where their grandparents or parents live, and so it's just a return to the old ways and a way to remind them of who they are. So I think it's a really special thing, and again, very different because so many countries I lived in Asia, they just want to whitewash and just get rid of their old culture, and they want you to look at their computers and their apps that they invented and things like that. In Mongolia, they're proud of that stuff, but they want to keep their old ways, and I think it's wonderful. So yeah, it's every year. It's in mid-July. And then the other funny thing is because, the summer is so short here, because it's 30 below zero in the capital during winter. Other parts of the country can go as 60 below zero. It snowed here in May. It was still snowing in June in some parts of the country. So summer's really short. So almost all the festivals are in summer. There's a whole bunch of them. And so when I first came, I was like, when does Nadam, when is it? Officially it's the 11th through the 15th. And then it turns out but then there's like this other festival that happens on the 16th and this other one on the 18th. So it's kind of like just like weeks of just different festivals, and also then regional, festivals, but they all involve wrestling and they all involve competitions, and they all involve wrestling. I don't know if they all involve the archery and horse racing, but a lot of them do.
And so you're going to go and compete?
Yeah. So some friends of mine, a university professor that I'm friends with, her and her husband is a sports journalist. They're going to take me to their village. I say their village, whatever, their parents' village, I don't know. And we're going to go to the village, and we're going to spend the 9th through the 14th there. And they've arranged for me to wrestle in the first round of Nadam on the 11th. And I just feel really lucky and blessed, and obviously I can't win. There's no way I can win. I haven't trained at all this year for Mongolian wrestling, none. Last year I had a little bit of training, so even gripping the clothing is actually really painful because they tie the rope around their midsection so tight. It's actually painful to grip it. And if you've done judo, and when you've done judo, jiu-jitsu, a lot of these archery grip clothing, there's always this thing in the back of your mind, like, I want to grip tight, but not so tight that I can't let go if I get thrown. So I don't want to break my fingers, Yeah, and these guys are just huge, and there's no weight limit. And the average for like a good competitor, a serious competitor, average is about 140 kilos.
Jeez. That's average?
Yeah, that's average.
What?
If you took the top 10%, 20% of competitors, the guys that really have some sort of a shot at winning, they're like 140 kilos.
So I
average.
imagine that since you can't touch the ground with anything but your soles of your feet, I would imagine that people do a lot of leg grabbing movements, or is it all like upper body stuff?
So today, freestyle wrestling has infiltrated every kind of traditional wrestling. Like when I was in India, I trained Greco to prepare for India, and I get there and the guy shot a low single and took me down. I'm like, where the hell did a low single get into Indian wrestling? But and here too, the guys all freestyle wrestling has infiltrated Mongolian wrestling. However, the difference between Mongolian wrestling and say Chinese wrestling or judo is that Chinese wrestling and judo, theoretically, if you really didn't want to grab the clothes or you don't like grabbing clothes or you're a wrestler, you could not grab the clothes and just, wrestle the guy and go for, arm drags and body locks and things like that. You could probably do that. In Mongolian wrestling, because the grips are so powerful, it would be really, once he grips you, you're basically obligated to throw him from grips because you're not going to get to his legs or his body lock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That'd be a whole interesting discussion we could have for several hours, the concept of grips, but probably boring to most people. But, because in judo, there's been arguments about what grips are allowed, and they actually, for Kodokan competition, they don't want you to lock hands behind their back or cross face. Yeah. It's kind of funny. It's like, I can choke you unconscious, but I can't put my hand across your face, and
right. Pick up
and I understand that everybody has their own reasons. I think they're be careful. Like they might be more worried about neck injuries or certain things like that. But actually in judo, you're not supposed to lock behind. But you're right. Actually, the way you grab the gi with the belt and the overhand can actually be just as good or better. Actually, maybe better because even this, it's always going to slip.
Yeah.
It's absolutely crushing to just grab somebody and just pull them in like that's a horrible, horrible feeling.
But you could definitely put a Western wrestler who never studied judo or who never studied Chinese wrestling, and you could put him in a match, and he would have a shot. He would have some kind of a shot. But I think in Mongolian wrestling, I don't think they would because once they grip your clothing, it's just such a. First of all, this is a rope. There's a rope here, and it's tied so tight that it restricts your breathing. They force your hand inside there and grip it. You're not shaking that.
Oh, so people actually put their hands inside of the clothing?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's really scary.
Yeah. The back of the collar, you're allowed to grip inside, which, what is it? I always forget the rule. One of them, judo, you can't grip inside, but jiu-jitsu you can, or vice versa?
Like you can't actually grab inside of the jacket or the orifice, but you can grab the collar or you can get here. Right. But there's touch and go areas, so they do have their rules, and especially with skill level, they don't want the kids to do the deep grip because a lot of kids fall on their heads. So I mean, every sport's got their own reasons why they decide what's illegal, even though it can all probably kill you in the right situation. But,
Chinese wrestling, there's 7 standard grips, although other grips are not illegal, but there's 7 standard. And then here in Mongolia, like literally anything goes, like any way you can grab the guy, you can grab it. Mm-hmm. But as a rule, it tends to be kind of the standard things because once they're just so strong, so powerful. I mean, a guy 140 kilograms, has his hand tied to your belly, basically, straightens his arm. Then what are you going to push? You're going to push against his arm and get inside? You're not.
Do you think it'd be wise to just try like hell to not get grabbed? or would that just be being chicken?
Well, I'm also not sure if this is how little I know about the art so far. I'm not sure if they start with a mandatory lockup like they do in Korean wrestling. Yeah, I think that they may actually start in a lockup. I know when I've binge practice, we started in lockup, but I don't know if that's the rule.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. because like with judo, especially at the Olympic level, people are like super patty about the grips because they know at that level, if they have anything, they could launch an attack. So the whole grip fighting, and probably most frustrating thing to watch for somebody that doesn't have experience. Like, oh, are they just like playing patty cake?
Right.
But like, except for with the blind, they always start out with the traditional.
Yes.
And man, I'm just
blind wrestling.
About like
blind wrestling too. That they have to start. If you wrestle a blind wrestler, you have to always keep hand contact.
Mm-hmm.
You're not allowed to break hand contact.
But I'm really excited. I hope. Can you come back and show us some videos, pictures, anything from this awesome experience?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. Why don't we plan to do that? We'll try next week or whenever you can come back.
Okay.
And this might sound like a plug, but I actually think I really got to get this book, this Wrestler's Dissertation. I was like, man, I want to ask you about this and this, and he was like, oh, cool. I actually wrote about that. It's like, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm definitely gonna get that. And it's on Amazon, right?
Yeah, it's on Amazon.
Both ebook and hardcover?
Yep. Both not hardcover, softcover and ebook available on Amazon.
Softcover on ebook. Okay. Well, I wish you luck. And I think you got a chance. Don't put yourself down. Just don't let those don't let those big fools grab you.
Dude, what if they match me? Like they can match me with a guy that's like 160 kilograms. Like, and I've been cutting weight, because I want to fight. I normally fight heavyweight, and this year I want to have one more MMA fight, and I'm cutting to welterweight. So right now I'm 81 kilograms right now, and normally I'm a heavyweight. I'm getting ready to fight the biggest opponents I ever fought in my life, and I'm the lightest I've been since high school.
Oh, so at least you're not it'd be hard if you were like 155 pounds or something. So you're like at least got 90 kilos, right? Or something.
Well, 81 now.
81? Yeah. Oh, 81. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. You can at least take the fall if you had to.
That's it. I've been practicing my falls.
Wow. Yeah, but I'm really excited to hear about that. So thanks so much for coming, and we'll stay in touch.
All right, thanks a lot for having me, Colt. I really appreciate it.
All right, so at the current time, Antonio has already competed in the Mongolian Nadam Manly Wrestling Festival, and he said he's going to come back on with pictures and insights on his experience, and I hope he gave him hell. But until that time, rats, stay in the dojo, keep practicing, and we'll catch you next time.
Sorry,